Hello, beautiful mamas. As a working mom, sometimes I can really feel scattered, unorganized, or simply just rushing from one thing to another and all over the place. Finding time for myself and finding my sanity can almost feel like an impossible dream. Can you relate? Well, this is why I have created my free Mama's Guide to Creating Balance and Harmony as my gift to you. This guide contains my top 10 tips to creating balance and harmony in your life, as well as 3 beautiful trackers to help you get onto your journey in a fun and simple way. I have found by incorporating daily self-care routines and practices in my life for as little as 5 minutes a day, I am feeling more grounded, centered, and calm. By me tapping into my best version through these practices, I am also a better mom, a better partner, and a better colleague. Well, really, just a better human being in all the ways. So, if this sounds like something that you would like to explore, click on the link in the show notes below and download your free guide today. We were all born with the innate power of knowing and wisdom within us. The challenge for many of us is that we were taught to seek answers externally instead of searching from within. And this is the reason why so many of us find ourselves going around in circles, searching for new ways, but could never find the way. The womanly way. It's not the way. It's not my way. But it is a pathway to support all of us returning back to self, reconnect with our inner wisdom through loving ourselves, knowing ourselves, and reconnecting with ourselves.
Tell me and be honest. Tell me should I've known.
So we can start to find our own way as modern day women. Are you interested? Well, sit back, relax, and welcome to this amazing journey. And we are live! Hello. Welcome to this episode of the Womanly Way podcast. I am your host, Lala Angela Wang. Today, we're mixing things up a little bit. Tapping into a different side of me, but also a very geeky side of me. We've got my friend Melanie from Imrama Astrology. I can never really pronounce that word properly, and she's given me a thumbs up, so that's a good sign. So Melanie is my personal astrologer when it comes to 12-sign tropical astrology. I've got my other go-tos for my 13 sign, the more, I guess, occult side of things. We won't talk about that today because then we can go down another complete different rabbit hole, right? I love Mel because she is direct. She will tell you as it is, but she's also, I guess, so far, I've done my sun return reading with her back in March. She's very accurate, and I'm just going to give this example as an intro as well. So when I did my sun return with Mel, she said, you're going to be traveling a lot this year. I'm like, no. Traveling's not on the cards this year. I've got nothing. You know what? As soon as I hit my birthday, all the travel plans started to pop up. So now I'm, I know I can be a bit of a rebel sometimes, but now I really listen to her advice very carefully. I've gone back to my reading. I've made notes. And I'm following her advice. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Melanie to the Womanly Way podcast. And I'm going to start with a question, obviously. Melanie, first of all, tell us about you. But most importantly, what are your signs?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Lala. And hello out there to your audience, your beautiful audience, and welcome. Okay, so I'll start probably, and it's so wonderful when I actually do hear in a living and breathing sense that my clients are really feeling some of the lessons of what I impart in my client sessions. Like, I love that. I think I might have said to you in your session, Lala, but I do say to clients, I don't really want people to think that I'm smart, but I want you to learn, because obviously from learning you grow, right? So to hear that events just serendipitous or otherwise have turned out is just amazing. So thank you. And I hope you keep living this birthday year juice and some of the other messaging, which we'll talk about today with the midlife transits, will come in. So without further ado, if some of the audience hasn't already guessed, so my astrology sign, so I'm an Aquarian sun, which is by element air, so communication, connection, lots of talking. And to couple that, I have a Gemini rising and Gemini moon, another place or another two placements of air. So we've got, tick, tick, tick if we're looking at elements. I am also Jupiter in Gemini generation. So I'm having a Jupiter return in 2024, and that's very, very happy about that. So again, air, air, and air. One of my beautiful planet placements is Venus in Pisces, which for a very long time, not even when I studied my diploma in contemporary astrology, did I understand its beauty. I used to always say, why do I always attract Pisceans? And then I came to know myself more through the life journey and via my birth chart. And I find that Venus placement for me, she is like one of my most tender spots. So I'm living in more to her. And that's obviously a water element. But yes, I'm very predominantly air sign based, and I have very, very little Earth by planets, but what really does ground me, Lala, and I think because other talks I have done or workshop talks for people, I just love to talk about Saturn, and that's because Saturn is opposite my sun. So he is actually the anchor that grounds the kite, which is me. Otherwise, I would be off in the wind for sure. So I have most admiration and complete respect for Saturn in Leo, which is my generation, opposite my Aquarian sun. So yeah, that's a bit about my astrology.
And I think by now you would have sensed Melanie really lives and breathes her astrology in her life. And that's why I love talking to her. Like, every time I speak to you, it's kind of like automatically we go down that astrology route. And, I think everything's really linked to astrology, right? We live underneath this big star and of sky. And obviously we are all influenced by the sky above us somehow. So how would you suggest that people use astrology in their lives?
So many different ways. I mean, in present modern day, it's become a very, very, in some cases, this is my personal take, could be very different for other astrologers and or other people out there. But for me, how to really give some context to this from my lens would be, I think astrology can be used in good ways and then not so good ways. And perhaps it's Saturn that reminds me in my own chart that I don't necessarily go out in my day-to-day world every day and think, oh my goodness, Mars is going to topple over me today, or Uranus is going to give me a bit of a boot on my bottom. However, I think for your listeners that do have a really keen interest in astrology, whether that's just learning from the very bare basics, not knowing much beyond your sun sign, or your star sign as it's referred to, and they want to know more, I would say just have keen awareness of where you'd like it to meet you. And it's almost like within astrology peer circles, we don't often, at least the astrologers that I surround myself with, we have a giggle about Mercury retrograde, but and every now and then we might say, oh goodness, there's so much traffic today, or I had some car problems, or just blame it on Mercury type day because he is retrograde. But yeah, I think it's I believe astrology now, I would answer that question differently right now compared to probably even 5 years ago, which is the context I've gone with so far. But I do feel astrology is one of those necessary, it's an esoteric transformation tool. So perhaps I see clients meeting astrology who've had an interest in it for years, but perhaps an external event or something is really bubbling in their lives where they really need to learn from something external from them to put some context to things, if that makes sense. And yeah, it sets someone on a path to really transform themselves if they do allow it. And it doesn't mean that you only, that live by the sword, die by the sword. So often a lot of my clients are already doing other healing modalities or other things at the same time. And then they dip into astrology wherever they feel it meets and serves them. And then they find the appropriate astrologer that they can trust and that they align with, to impart, hopefully, is really helpful, useful information. And I think also, Lala, I'd like to say, how would you, that was a question, wasn't it? I was like, all my air planets are like, woo.
How would you support,
it's like,
how would you use astrology in life, right?
Yes, and I think to use it is like, the word use is, you need to understand who you are as well to know what path of astrology to go down, because there's so many different types of house systems, styles.
I think that's the thing for me. Astrology for me is a tool out of my toolkit that allows me to understand more of who I am. And it's from that point I can then go, yes, Melanie told me to be aware of these things, but how do I best, I guess, utilize it as a tool so I can be the best version of me? Does it make sense?
It does, yeah. I'm feeling deep into it because it's a deep question.
It is. It's like, how deep of the rabbit hole do you want to go down into?
Yeah. It's like, Lala, where are you taking me?
Well, it's not actually a question. I think for me, it's a perfect segment into why are we talking about midlife transits in particularly, right? Because I'm 41 this year, and based on my understanding, I think this whole conversation, I started really following astrology when I discovered there's actually a thing called a Saturn return around your late 20s, early 30s. And that's when I went through my own, what I call a quarter-life crisis. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. So astrology is really more than what I had known, which is just, the 12 signs and all the things that you look at, your daily forecast, your monthly forecast, that kind of thing. And that's when I start to have a real interest as to, are there more things similar to a quarter life crisis that's linked to astrology as well? And when we did my sun return reading this year, you said to me, oh, actually, what do I have again? I've got a Neptune square. Is that right?
I don't have your chart straight up.
What's that thing that we were
In
talking
terms
about?
of your midlife transit that you're having, yeah. So you're deep in what we call the Neptune square, which is one of the midlife, one out
which
of
will
four of the midlife. Yeah,
and that was when I
So it
realized,
means,
perimenopause, midlife crisis, that's actually, it all makes sense now. And that's when I reached out to Mel and said, can we do a segment on, essentially our midlife transit? And that's just explore so our audience can understand a bit more about what could be coming up for them. Right? And then how can we actually explore more and understand ourselves more and be prepared for this doom and gloom thing that we call midlife crisis.
I will also say on that, there can be, again, that's where the client or the person hopefully aligns themselves with an astrologer that's able to guide them through that, so it doesn't feel, even with the heavier sort of like the Pluto square transit that we have at 37 or 38, but around 37, so that it doesn't feel like that weighted nature. And what can really flavor it more so for a person too, which takes me back to why you're probably, because I'm thinking, so Lala's already had the Pluto square at 37, 38, and on the cusp of the Saturn opposite Saturn, but I'm like, what would make it so impactful that she has gone straight to the Neptune square out of, after the Pluto square, particularly as well. And I think for your listeners, it's important to know that too. What makes it a little bit more impactful is, for example, if you have some personal planets, so that could be like the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus. If they are impacted in the storyline of the actual transit, undoubtedly that's going to be even more poignant, if that makes sense.
So
I do
personal
think
planets are the ones closer to the sun, isn't it? So we use...
Yeah, the personal planets are kind of the planets that, exactly, in terms of its proximity to the sun. And I work with, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, and Jupiter is the sixth. And then the seventh planet that I work up to is Saturn. So I don't discredit. Definitely Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto have complete relevance, particularly when we're talking about midlife. But in terms of like a rulership factor, which might be something your listeners are aware of, or if you're not, but planets that rule certain zodiac signs, the seven that I just listed, the Sun through to Saturn, are the ones I work with in terms of having the main rulerships over all of the 12 zodiac signs. And then it becomes quite impactful for someone when you have these midlife transits and these periods. We then start to talk about those outer planets, because the outer planets like your Pluto, Uranus and Neptune, they're so slow, like their orbit is so slow, and particularly Neptune. It is not like having a Venus return or a Jupiter return, meaning that, the planet return comes back to the same space, that they go back and forth in terms of forward, backward, and they're so far out beyond what the human eye's concept is that undoubtedly when we do have transits or connections to our personal planets from those three, Pluto, Neptune, and or Uranus, we do start to feel it for sure. Does that make some sense? I'm hoping I haven't diverted too much.
No, not at all. I think it's really good background information, right? I mean, I don't want to assume that everybody knows astrology like we do. So some background information is always good. Well, I guess that's a great segue going into, because we've got quite a few things to cover today. So you said that the Pluto square happens around 36, 38. Is that right?
Around 37. Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends on which generation of Pluto, in terms of which generation or zodiac sign it's in. So these outer planets, so Pluto, Neptune, Uranus transits, which occur within our midlife, are essentially, I'm just thinking where I was going. So the orbit can, thereabouts, 37, 38 for the Pluto square.
Because Pluto is one of the
mine it was 37.
Sorry. If I understand correctly, Pluto is one of those funny planets that it doesn't go in it orbits in a funny shape as well.
Does it? Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like astrology versus astronomy. So, and which in any sort of context, they never completely agree in each other's world, but they should come together. So I will say, and preface to say, that I've not ever, of course, studied astronomy. I've looked through a telescope, but no basics of things. But I think that's more of an astronomical type question in terms of, I know the timing of some of these outer planets, but in terms of what they look like and what you just described, I mean, I know that Saturn has icy cold rings, for example.
Yeah.
And Uranus is like our shock of electricity, like we've put our fingers into a PowerPoint style.
So I guess, what's the theme? Let's talk about Pluto first, because that's one of the very first transits, as I understood, in terms of midlife transit. What are the themes that people can pick up on around that 36 to 38 age in terms of a Pluto square transit?
Because also, too, in a quick hot minute, to just have a look at that, at around 35, we have a Saturn square Saturn. Okay, so for your listeners, that means your Saturn in your own natal chart makes a very tricky communication. So if your listeners can think of, perhaps, when I talk about aspects, or aspect just means to make contact or communicate. So the aspect being Saturn square Saturn, 2 years before this Pluto square, right? The square is a friction point. So it's almost like, as well, this Saturn square, 2 years before that Pluto square, it starts to start a bit of a rumblings in people's world.
So, Mel, basically what you're saying is, before Pluto square, and it sounded like some people may experience it, some people may not, there's actually a Saturn square as well?
Just 2 years before that. So at 37, we have that Pluto square Pluto. And then 2 years before that, at around 35, we have one of our 7-year increment Saturn transits, because Saturn transits happen every 7 years. And I've just taken us back to that first, because I just felt it was important just for the listeners to give context around those midlife transits, because it's almost like they really start to rumble and shake, and you feel things really from that point, and then it really leads right through to, in some cases, our 46th year of birth, or 45th year at least. And that's kind of the passage that, say, from 35, that 10-year passage. And it's a very crucial, with the client work that I have been doing to date, I've just been noting and observing that it's a very crucial time for people, because obviously we are in different stages compared to when we had our Saturn return, for example, at 28, 29, which undoubtedly rather, for better of a term, really boots things out. But we get to this mid-30s part of our life, and it's almost like a rumbling and offerings, and just things start to come into our consciousness that perhaps weren't there at that first Saturn return. And yeah, the midlife transit period, I'm very passionate about it, and also having lived through. And, you know, like we say as astrologers with eclipses, it too shall pass. So your listeners can have confidence to know that these transits of midlife, they shall pass. And no astrologer can make that easier for people. It depends on, as I said earlier, what the planets, personal planets, if there's any involved, and how that particular midlife transit is or isn't communicating in a helpful, strengthening way. And the reason why these are called like your midlife crisis type transits. So there is some sort of a crisis that is stirred within you, even for the most stoic of, you know, star sign being, say, a Taurus, who perhaps, by better of the word, with so much love, doesn't like a lot of change. But, you know, a Taurus too will also be impacted by Uranus, given that it is in Taurus. But anyway, for your listeners, so I don't digress too much with my air, let's come back to. So I'm hoping, is that
what's the flavor of the Saturn?
The Saturn square at 35?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Saturn generally is one of those planets of, it's about time. It's about restricting. You know, we might have to put restrictions or boundaries in place to be able to have some useful time considerations in our life. Saturn is many things. I mean, a lot of people fear Saturn because he is the mastering, it's the planet of all things to master within our own chart. We also have other considerations of with Saturn. Yeah, I just feel we become more aware of time. So either it's a fact of not enough time, or just time in general is, you know, my clock is ticking for whatever reason, you know, perhaps. So you could put that into context for maybe that Saturn square well placed around that average age of 35. So, you know, it could be, for example, whether it's a woman looking to conceive and she hasn't been able to conceive, but it's that getting serious about it, putting some things into place. This is just an example. It doesn't mean, of course, men experience this as well, but just giving listeners on the womanly way a bit of feminine, hopefully, interest. You feel it's almost like from that Saturn return at the age of 28, that first one, 28, 29, then you come to 35 at the next 7-year interval of Saturn, and he swings around again, and you have to apply the lessons. So Saturn is about lessons. So it's like what you haven't, an application, applying oneself. So what you haven't applied back then, being your first Saturn return, maybe you need to refine and polish some things. Then at age 35, at that Saturn square Saturn, then you've got that opportunity. Yes, there can be challenges with Saturn as well. That's generally why some people are a bit fearful of it, is probably some bit of a term like that, and that's a realistic term. And that's another Saturn word too, is you get real. You want to get real about something. I don't know if even if you reflect back to, say, your first Saturn return, like there's just, Saturn is just the planet of reality, and we can't hide that.
It's really funny you say that. So my first Saturn return, I guess the result of it was that I left my first marriage, right?
Wow.
And as you were talking, I cast myself back to 6 years ago, which is 2018.
Yeah.
That was when I first met Scott. So the relationship I had early in 2018 did not work out. I was with another person, and then I met Scott towards the end of 2018.
Wow.
So it's really interesting because if you look at the concept of relationships, especially from a female perspective, and I'm going to go really old school, right? The whole reason that us female exist is to conceive, to have kids, to form family. And it's really interesting. My Saturn return, my family fell apart because it didn't work for me. And it almost felt like 2018, my Saturn square, what it was trying to do is to put me onto the right path so I could do what I meant to do here as a feminine body, and also to do what I meant to do, you know, to then become George's mom.
Wow. And did you, with having that awareness now, just to ask as well, were you also through that process of that marriage dissolving, or you coming to a reality, Saturn, that things are just not working? Saturn also is also about commitment, and commitment to self often comes up, and how much of ourselves are we committing to? It's about, we can recommit to things. Perhaps it may have gone the other way in your case, but it didn't for whatever reason. So did you also have other modalities too that you were getting some resourceful help from at that time?
Yes. Yeah. But I wasn't fully into my spirituality yet. I think I've always been intuitive, and it was just now in hindsight, I really felt like I was being guided down to this path. But like I was nowhere near as spiritual as I am now. Like I wasn't talking to anybody, I wasn't meditating, or it just kind of happened.
Yeah. And often when we are having a Saturn transit too, we can feel like a containment of pressure. So even though this may occur, this first midlife Saturn square, and sorry, Lala, that wasn't on the list, but I've diverted and gone to it.
That's okay.
But because I just feel that it's a very important resource for your listener base. I just think that, for better of the word, it just kind of, it doesn't set up things. We're maybe not conscious of it completely, but we also have a bit of an after effect of that sort of, I don't know if I want to say like even a small bitter taste in our mouth of what didn't work at that Saturn return at 28, 29. We get real then. We either, it's our first maturation step. From under the wings of our home, our parents, we step out into the world, I guess at least astrologically, at that first Saturn return. That's our first, I always see an image of a human being with a suitcase on the ground with their back, and then from the photo, we see just their back, a gate, and a suitcase. And it's like they have to walk out into the world with that suitcase, because what that suitcase contains is the next 30-year story of their life, which would take them through to that full Saturn cycle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's undoubtedly, that's one of the firsts. And then 2 years later, we start to have this, to finally answer it. Sorry, listeners, but to finally answer it, I'm going to put my phone, had to plug the phone in. To put some things into context is, Yeah, look, Pluto square Pluto. So it's not one of the easier ones. And as I said, I think should a person be having a difficult period around this time of life, so around 37, 38, okay? And it can almost kind of start to feel like, 2 years before that, having that Saturn square. And if there's any bitter moments, sometimes there might be some huge achievements there because the person's really applied themselves in a Saturnian sense, and they can really reap rewards. But often square aspects by nature create friction. And what they do is they ask of us to take action, and things don't happen easily, like say a 180-degree aspect being a trine where there's a harmonious triangular flow. These are square aspects, which is why they are very well placed within a midlife transit, because what they're doing is squares create that sort of inner boiling pot. And it's kind of like, oh, I need to get past this. It's almost like I've got to get through it, but when's it going to end? And it's because this period is from that 35 up to 45, 46, in between 46 and 51, which we won't cover that today, but you get a couple of other transits alongside that too. But it's just like this 10-year, it's like this really poignant 10-year gap that I think I've been really charged as the astrologer to impart in people. And also having lived some of it myself as well, without using myself as an example, but I can feel, I have empathy when a client comes and they're having a midlife transit. I had a man recently and he was having his Neptune square. So when we talk about that, because I know obviously, as you've said, this is where you're at, but it was really interesting to observe for a man where he was at with it, and the flow and things, but the same sort of themes come up, and some of it is a bit difficult, some of it's not, if that makes sense. So going back to where we sort of find ourselves, so at 37 with Pluto, we have again the square aspect. So just think of your boiling pot on the stove, and you've cranked it right up to maximum heat in that way, so the heat is on. So Pluto is one of those planets that can create an inner power struggle or even an external power struggle. And that might seem really cliche because I don't work as a modern type astrologer. I'm a very, which isn't a joke, having Saturn opposite my sun, but I'm like a pure traditionalist. Like I love tradition, but then I don't. I can be very rebellious, but Pluto for me, so you might read in, say, more, your listeners might be, say, more used to the fact that Pluto is assigned to Scorpio in terms of having rulership to Scorpio. That is not how I work as an astrologer, but I do appreciate that there is astrologers out there that do that, which is amazing. For me, Pluto becomes part of the story when it's in the sky and, say, for example, it conjuncts your moon or it conjuncts your Aries sun. That's when it would become huge. And again, these are outer planets. They spend certain periods of time in zodiac signs, and Pluto also spends longer. Say, for example, so Saturn would spend 2.5 years in a sign, around 27 months, whereas Pluto is in a sign for way, way, way much longer than that, as is Uranus and as is Neptune. Pluto likes to play around a bit longer do the other two. So one thing that I think I might say too is that these midlife transits are something that often we feel within very strongly. So we feel them internally. Perhaps I should have prefaced that at the beginning, but it's just dropped in now. And yes, sometimes external events can mirror or reflect that, but I have found that these are all inner feelings. So, for example, like what you described, Lala, about the 2018 events relating to Saturn, would you find that that was your case in this example, that you felt internalized and obviously living versions came in the outer world, or not?
Yeah, there's a lot of inner work in the background that was needed. But I think for me, the Pluto square wasn't as prominent, mainly because if you look at the timeline, it was 2020. Right, the world around me was going through essentially death and rebirthing, because that's my understanding is what Pluto is, right? It's a planet of death and rebirthing. So for me personally,
and we have to remember, on that, we have to remember too, we had in 2020 the I just don't have my astrologer's ephemeris with me, but from recollection, so don't shoot me out there. But we had, at that stage in 2020, we had Pluto in Capricorn, and then we also had Saturn in Capricorn as well. So yes, there's a lot to be said about what that occurred, and there was a lot of rhetoric.
Sorry. So in saying that, the womanly way was actually born in 2020.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing.
Around my birthday as well. So.
Wow, that's pretty poignant, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so if you look at your achievements and then your emotional response to that, now it's like, look at the hard yards, like look at what I did, look at what I've created. Yes, it was hard. As I said, this too shall pass. But throughout the transits, it's important that your clients ask for help. They reach out. I'm not a qualified, say, for example, holistic counselor or a guidance counselor or counseling therapist, but I always make sure that if there is something really tricky, that I've got a little bit of a referral list, which I think is incredibly important for astrologers to have, and I can refer out. Because often in these midlife transits, they can be very tricky times, and the Pluto transits can often, I know we've gone all over the place with your listeners. They're probably like, where's she taking us? The Pluto transits are a time where we do reach out for therapy. Pluto is about therapy. Pluto is going deep within the psyche. It's behind the scenes. So if you think about closing the blinds to life, there isn't a great feeling when you actually have a power struggle, right? So we often have a power struggle. There's a power struggle within us at the Pluto square Pluto at 37, 38. And it's and you will always hear, your listeners might be attuned to Pluto being about death of something within, and rebirth. So Pluto represents that phoenix. So, we have to allow something to die, its death, to ashes, with love, to be reborn again. And it's like we go to the deepest Hades underground part of us, If you talk to anyone who's had any sort of, really tricky Pluto transit to the sun, the moon, they will completely understand this depth. And it's almost like you take yourself to, you can feel like things are just eroding around you, and that at the Pluto square. And again, like that stone gathering moss, as though it's like, is this going to end? And I'm not one of the astrologers to be flamboyantly dramatic. Just that it's so deep and cathartic, a Pluto transit. So I personally remember having a power struggle with someone, and I wanted to actually, around that time, and sometimes if we don't heed the inner advice that we're guided, or we don't listen to the rumblings that are coming within in these midlife transits, what actually happens is you do get a little bit of the planetary external boot. So things will happen around you. And I would imagine your listeners understand at least that. And I guess I'm being a little bit playful there as well. But if we leave things too long, like anything, it will make a decision for us, is what I'm saying. So with Pluto, it's like you can have a little bit of a, I say little bit, but it's probably more than a little. I'm sugarcoating it. But yeah, it brings to light perhaps where power is imbalanced, where there is a misuse of it somewhere, whether you're misusing your own or whether someone externally is trying to cross the lines with you. So it's a deep feeling. And yeah, Saturn's pressure and reality, Pluto, going back to your very initial question, how does it feel? I guess for yourself, even Lala, taking yourself back to, say, let's just plonk yourself back to maybe 4 years ago, and thinking how you might have felt 4 or 5 years ago being under the guise of this, whether you can do that or not. But that it's that friction point too. You're going to get tests. People are going to like prod you. Again, it's the square aspect. Prod, prod, prod. Boiling pots on the stove, have to take action. If you don't take the action, it sometimes can be taken for you to decide, and then that's when you kind of feel like perhaps you're stripped of your own power in that way. And there's a conflict at the Pluto square as well. It's that inner outer conflict. Also too, like Pluto speaks to loss. So again, when we go so deep in the psyche, and there is like a grief process where if we are asking to allow something to die to be reborn, then there's obviously a chain of events or a grief process. So whether that is something quite major, like a huge relationship, in my case, it was a friendship that was like a family member of mine. So it was really, really hard to let that go. And there was just a power dynamic that became uneven in my life. And I suddenly felt this, and I hope you don't mind me quickly imparting this, but at least to give you a context and your listeners a context, I felt empowered, but there was a point where I couldn't really speak that in the Pluto square. But and with the Pluto square, like with the Neptune that we'll talk about, the Neptune square, and then also the Uranus opposition, we'll get to those, but it's it's one of those things where we just have to let go. And in the Pluto, sometimes to gain that personal power, you have to let go of the external. You know, you kind of want to hold on, but you can't, if that makes sense.
But that's the death component of Pluto, isn't it?
Like the burning of the things that no longer serve. Are you finding any little mini reflections with what I'm saying, or just in terms of maybe even what you see in your life, if you've got friends around this age, or with what you do at work? You know, you might have a work colleague that's going through something like this. I mean, not recalling or telling the story, but we've all got like people in our lives, right, where they might be just like, oh my God, like it just seems to be one thing after another at the moment. And perhaps,
to be honest, I don't have a lot of friends in my age group. As funny as it sounds, at work, a lot of them are a lot younger. So I'm actually seeing their Saturn return for a lot of them.
Oh, wow. So they're late 20s, are they? Yeah.
Yeah. But reflecting back to myself in 2020, when the Womanly Way was created, there was actually a lot of inner conflict around the masculine and the feminine, because I came from a very masculine background, and having to that go. You know, prior to that, 2018, I've just published a book all about men and construction and emotions and feelings, and having to let that identity go and go, okay, I surrender to this. And the universe at the time was clearly guiding me to support more women in the workforce, and hence adopting the Womanly Way. But even through the adaptation of the Womanly Way, there was a lot of negotiating with the universe, which I won't go into because that's another rabbit hole to go into. There's a lot of negotiation of what form is it going to take, what form am I going to take, who am I going to be. And funny enough, you know, Melanie and I, we have the same spiritual mentor and teacher that we go with, and that was the year when I signed up.
Oh, wow. And did it feel like you were sort of taking back your power somehow?
I think that was the year when I heavily, like when I say heavily, very heavily invested in mentoring and coaching. I had about 4 mentors and coaches I was following. And I think for me, if you look at that way about, you know, our inner wisdoms and trusting ourselves, I wasn't trusting myself. So in that sense, my power was taken away, but I didn't have the awareness back then.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And I think that's something that I said earlier, you know, sometimes, of course, and if people aren't even aware of astrological transits as a thing and just know their sun sign, which is what most people lovingly do, which is fantastic. But when we get to these midlife transits, as I was saying, they just become very poignant because we have steps along the way. We've either been married or not. Or, I mean, you know, marriage is not necessarily a ceremonial church thing. I just mean a committed relationship, longer term. Saturn's about commitment and long term. So we start, you know, with this Saturn square, then we lead into that Pluto square Pluto, and we're just kind of like, yeah, I'm gaining wisdom, Saturn, but life's kind of throwing me a few curveballs as I keep going on in the mid-30s. So, you know, I had written some things in my notes around today's podcast, and maybe your listeners will find this funny. I guess the Gemini planets in me found them what I had written hilarious. But, you know, when you hear from, you know, even if it's acquaintances or friends or in circles, right, whatever, your work circles, whatever, and someone will say, oh my God, like, did you see so-and-so? Like, they've got a new tattoo, or did you see the sports car that they've just bought? Or, yeah, just like that, they just broke up. after X amount of years, and then you see the different fallouts. But that's sort of like, you know, he or she just went out and bought a sports car as though they were giving the finger to the world, and getting that tattoo, you know, that speaks to me as the astrologer as being very Uranus midlife transit. So without consciously knowing it, like you said, back in 2020, you weren't consciously aware and not in the same space of knowing yourself like you do in present day. I'd say in truth, a lot of people are in those spaces, and then they don't then understand what's happening.
And that's what I really hope this podcast could help people with, right? If we can give them a little bit of flavor as what each of the transit means or looks like, obviously without different charts, it's all different, then
yes,
at least there's awareness. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
and then it would also depend on in your birth chart, like if clients have seen, or listeners rather, have seen their birth chart, where in their house, their life, is this communicating? And if you have never looked at that, then it would be definitely worth getting hold of an astrologer. So then the next level of the wonderful sponge cream cake of life is that the astrologer can then impart what areas of life are going to be impacted, because that gives the awareness. It allows the client to have some growth. But even when they're in the harder, trickier, you know, your Pluto squares are very different to the Neptune square. You're in a different place. So even though I said squares are difficult, but Neptune, oh wow, Mama Lucia, you're very different in a Neptune midlife transit than you are in a Pluto. You kind of think that in Neptune, it's the rose-coloured glass, you know, until it gets pierced style. But in the Pluto, it's way more.
You keep reminding me of it.
We'll come back to that. But I think it's important to say to the listeners that, you know, if things are heavy and you can't understand them, then please, you know, like I said, I'm not the therapist or counsellor, but please have your team around you to really reach out and help you make some sense of what's going on. In all seriousness, that is incredibly important, and it would be unprofessional of me to suggest anything else.
And I think it will also be foolish of anyone to think that we can solely, you know, rely on astrology and just go, well, that's just the way it is. So I'm just let it all poo-pooed out, and then it'll work out eventually, right? You do actually have to do some work.
All right now is I'm seeing the poo emoji times 100 now.
Pretty much.
And we're talking about the Pluto square.
Sorry, so do you think it's a good segment to go into Neptune?
Yeah, I think one thing that I probably would say to leave the Pluto square is letting go, as I've already prefaced and said. Letting go is the theme, and yes, there is a level of pain in some cases when things are dying and rebirthing. I just feel that, there is a strength that will come if you have that right support structure around you to really rebirth and rise from that. And, you know, perhaps noting down in your life while you're going through it, what type of real achievements are there? Because even in the most crappiest moments, there actually is really great little seeds of something, even if it doesn't feel it, if that makes sense, Lala. I mean, you're a coach as well. So, like I said, you know, I would never, it's not my job to make it better. And I definitely stand by myself as the astrologer. My languaging, I'm very careful with, and I don't make jokes or light of things like that. But it's like, okay, let's basically see what we can do with what we work with. We've got what we can work with. What can we do?
I love that.
If that makes sense. Yep. Oh, thank you. So, and be honest with yourself in that Pluto square. transit as well. And letting go of unhealthy patterns is another thing as well. So there is a lot to it, and it's deep, and sometimes it's what we're not used to talking about. It's about society. We're getting better at talking about the grief and the death and getting people to understand the importance and the beauty of that. But I guess there is wonderful people out there, and I like to think that, we're now part of that, serving that angle in a different way to help people. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So, do you feel like that's a good explanation for your beautiful audience? Yeah. Okay. So next, you let me know where are we going again?
Neptune, my favorite at the moment.
Oh, goodness, mighty Neptune. He's funny, Neptune. So
I guess a bit of background information. The reason that we joke about Neptune is because I'm right in the middle of my Neptune square transit at the moment. And whenever Melanie meets me or whenever we catch up, she always mentions mushroom, because you will know I love my mushroom juice. And how it just gets me into La La Land. So I'll let you explain a bit more about Neptune Square. So I guess hopefully by the end of it, people will understand our private joke.
Yeah, so Neptune, like I have said, with the square, it's still that aspect that requires us to do something. The interesting thing is that I think we believe we're a lot more active in a Neptune transit than what is physically present. In Neptune, in reflection, I think it's very well placed in midlife for human beings, because we're at a stage. So Neptune is like the god of water, and we start to think of what could be possible. So this could be a little bit of a weave in, like I might go and buy, if I could, I might go and buy, my really, depending on your economics, it might be, I guess, for Australian listeners, the MX-5 is the version of the sports car, or it could be something with a little bit of grunt, a turbo, AMG Mercedes, if that's your thing. But we start to think about dream a little dream with the Neptune square. So we go, what could be really possible here? We get to around about, say, it could even be 40, 41, 42, let's say around 42. Again, I don't expect, I don't want accuracy in terms of, that didn't happen for me, but it's a, between 40 to 43. So, yeah, we start to have some visions, because that's very much tied to Neptune, and creativity is another key word. So if we've got dreams and vision and creativity coming together around this age swirling, it's like, I really want to create something that's always been a dream within. Maybe it's possible, maybe it's not, but in a Neptune square, we really believe it's possible. And that's great. So what happens is, with Neptune, again, being one of those outer planets, we'll first have Neptune, what it's called direct, so moving in its normal motion of speed and motion in the sky. Then there'll be, with a Neptune square, you'll probably get three, I call it 3 contact points. So you'll get 3, at least minimum 3 contact points of this Neptune square. So first Neptune will be direct, then it will go backwards. The same thing happens with the Pluto square as well, depending on what zodiac sign and generation you have, again, the orbit and the speed of that. Some people can have up to 4, say, contact points. And usually it's the first contact point where we go, "Oof," whether it's for the Pluto and the Neptune, and we're just like, oh, wowzers. And we feel the energy change to the characteristic or the feel of what that planet represents. So as you can see, we're building a bit of a dialogue, 35, 37. Then we kind of like, I wouldn't say cruise through, because every individual birth chart could have something in between 37, the Pluto square, and then also and you'll have Jupiter moments, North Node, South Node. Anyway, I digress. So Neptune is, one thing in Neptune transits, Lala, is that just things aren't clear. So you think that you're clear, then all of a sudden, like when Neptune goes retrograde in the sky through that transit for you and comes back to your natal, starts to approach Neptune again, you're kind of like, I don't know, I don't really remember what it was that I wanted. And you're laughing, but do you resonate? Like, are you?
Not yet.
So you've got a dream, a creative dream, and you're like, yeah.
I'm
I can't remember when I said to you had your first.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to September. I'm waiting to get out of this so then I can kind of compare my notes. But for me right now, in the middle of it, internally I'm clear, but at the same time I'm sensed that there's a lot of external unclearness around me. Right, you and I have spoken about my work situation. There's a lot of unclearness around me. And from a fire sign, I just want certainty and just want to do things. I can't do things. And for me, it's,
Well, you're an Aries Mars native, I might say, for the listeners. So Lala's Mars, and you hopefully, obviously, don't mind if I say that. I have said it, but you're a Sun Mars conjunction is what we call it in Aries. So of course, like, that is a completely different nature. Neptune currently is in Pisces. So it's for better of, that is a very different energy to your native template. And this is the important thing while I mention this. That's why it's so important to know yourself first, so that when these energies or these midlife transits, if they are quite foreign, which often they can be for people, it's like, oh, I'm not really used to completely living in this whole, with the Pluto square too, I said letting go, and Neptune's probably even more aligned to that. It's like, we've got to also just let be, come back. There's that, with Pluto, definitely there's the regeneration and the transformation and a reclamation of a power that's within us. But with Neptune, it's like this little tap on, we've got our foggy glasses on, and we're kind of reminded back to our own natal Neptune that exists in our chart, in our little souls. What is our dream? Like, what do we want to do? And Neptune might be also in close contact to someone's sun or moon or their Venus. So that would then play into it, and that would create a larger dynamic. Sometimes too, Lala, you hear of those stories where, like, people get fleeced in love, or they get swept up, and they're like, oh, someone reached out, and, kind of like those Ponzi schemes or something like that. And my astrologer brain sometimes thinks, I wonder if the person's having a Neptune transit, because it's the belief. Neptune's about believing what's possible. That weaves into our dreams, because we have faith that, imagine if I could, Neptune doesn't have boundaries like Saturn. Neptune is the very outer for good reason, in the way that, well, not the very outer, but it doesn't have the restricted bounds for good reasons, because it allows us to have that higher mind, higher intuition. It is about the things we can't see. So literally, we may not see things, but also it is related, Neptune has a relationship to the spiritual realm. It doesn't suddenly mean everybody's going to take their shoes and clothes off and start, chanting under a full moon.
Please don't.
But it also does mean that even for some people that maybe weren't completely consciously plugged into that area under a Neptune square, they start to perhaps just attend a yin yoga class or something really entwining spiritual that brings them internally. Because I said with these transits of midlife, it's an internal feeling, something to have a belief or faith of themselves. And that could be something very simple as burning incense or doing a yin class.
I find it interesting that you say that because, I think the conversation that I've been having with Melanie this whole time when I'm in this transit is I don't feel that I'm in La La Land, because for goodness sake, I'm always in La La Land, right? But what the message I continue to get is to have faith. And that's the message. I think it's partially because I'm very strong in my fire and I just want to do things. And for me, I actually feel things is not happening for me on purpose. And it's about building that belief. It's, it's kind of like the opposite of believing too much. It's I actually need to believe more, believe that this is actually happening for me and have that patience that, there is a higher power, that it will happen somehow. And for me, a lot of things that I'm experiencing right now is that the fire in me just want to go, but I almost feel like there's higher powers that's almost holding me back just to say, hey, hold on a second. That it's not happening, right? But you just need to believe.
As in, sorry, Lala, as in don't get too far ahead of yourself. There's like a little reminder, to just say
I
that
want it to happen. Ooh. It's just not happening, right? And I get very impatient because of my fires, because of my Aries. And whenever I get impatient, the message kept coming to me is just be patient and have faith. Be patient and have faith.
And yeah, that's beautiful because it's so individualized of how this transit is expressed. Perhaps you only have Neptune standing alone and it's not close to any personal planet, like I had mentioned. So generally you're having a lot of things. I think you have a Neptune story in your chart. Yes.
I'm going to check now.
I think even just for clients, say if Neptune is in a specific generation or sign, say, for example, you've got Neptune in Sagittarius, which is my generation, and then it makes this square, essentially, what can happen is you still feel definitely like that you want to have part of a dream. But the funny thing is, it's like there's an altered reality when you're in a Neptune. So, Saturn wants reality. Neptune alters the reality. And I actually find it very interesting that also too, knowing what mushroom products that you are using, how they have an outer bound frequency to them. And we are very aware in this modern day that people use nootropics and I guess medicinal mushrooms in a different form, and however that might apply to them personally. But this is also a very interesting topic that can be related to Neptune too. Sometimes when it feels like the god of water, if you think of water like a tide rushing over you, it's overwhelmed. So if that's not an energy that you're used to and you fight it, like I said, with these midlife transits, if you fight the external force, then sometimes with Neptune also rules things like drugs and alcohol, things that can take us to altered states. So I just want to preface, I am not either shaming or advocating, but I'm saying as the astrologer, this is some examples sometimes too with a Neptune square. Perhaps, people might find that they're drinking more, or they are perhaps engaging in some type of, for other better of the word, illegal type drug use, or there's just that nature of altered state. So they want to alter their state to be able to cope. If that, I'm saying that hopefully in the most professional
I love that
way.
you say that. You actually reminded me in my session just to be mindful with my love for food.
Did I?
And
Wonderful.
And I'm really finding this year, it's because I'm on, the carnivore diet journey, it's actually really interesting because I do have cravings for a certain type of food. And it's, it's been challenging, I must say, in terms of my food choices. And I wouldn't use the word struggling, but the carnivore diet, as easy as it may sound to some people, to me, I still have cravings, right? I crave my sugary food. I crave my takeaway food and all the things that I'm not allowed to have in my carnivore diet. So I think what Melanie's really trying to say is, if you know yourself enough, and I know myself quite well in terms of I do have addicted personalities, right? I can get, and that's why I don't watch series. That's why I'm lucky enough that I don't actually have the capacity to drink. But I also know there are certain things that people could easily get addicted. I try not to touch, and my kryptonite is really sugar and carb.
Yes, so and that is like one of those legal drugs, like caffeine. So people might just start to apply more caffeine in. And it can go other ways
TV,
as
right?
well.
It could be, there's many different forms of addiction. It could be TV. It could be sex.
Correct.
For goodness sake.
Exactly.
Or work.
Correct. Yeah. It's just more of a, because things seem so overwhelming, and then often with the Neptune square, you have reduced your vision's impaired. So like taking your listeners back to the rose-colored glasses, but it is a beautiful transit to bring forth some dreams and get really creative. It could even be a time, because literally people might be having babies. So you'd be in the newborn, whatever, if it's first baby or not, mother and father. You could be, even if you're a man having this transit, you're in that baby bubble. So that's kind of that, the blurred lines, loss of self, that type of area. So that there is many different iterations of how the Neptune square could play out. And like all of these midlife transits, what makes it incredibly personal, like I said before, is to have an astrologer explain the areas and or to make it quite clear if it's making contact to other planets too, and how you can best navigate that.
So I think to sum it up, I think Neptune is really, it's almost like in various ways that you could be losing yourself, right? Not necessarily.
You do, and you've nailed it. Neptune is a loss of a sense, because we're talking about water as the element. So we're losing a sense of ourselves. And often that can be very well linked to the fact of suddenly I have an urge to do a yin class. Why is that? I've never been into that, yet my girlfriend or boyfriend was banging on to me 3 years before every day to come along to a class. All of a sudden I want to go. And then, you see people talking in cafes. Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. I feel liberated. So
not so much in 3 months' time.
Nailed it.
And I think for me, it's really interesting because right now I'm going through a phase where I'm really revisiting the womanly way. For me, I'm revisiting, is this what I really want to do for the next, however long?
Yeah, and it's been a dream, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's really about reevaluating. So what's my purpose? I've done the womanly way for the past, I don't know, since 2020, so 4 years. is this what I really want to do in the long term? And what is it's been a real reevaluation of what's my mission, what's my purpose. And I'm just, tying back to when we spoke at the beginning of the show. For me, it's great, and I'm so grateful that I have Melanie telling me about my Neptune transit. And now I'm just like, I'm going to sit in this space. I'm going to dream about the possibility, but at the same time, have some senses, right? That's reevaluated once I'm out of the transit. I think that's the powerful aspect of using astrology as a tool, because then it helps me make life decisions in a more, I don't want to use the word control, but maybe more a planned
Conscious?
or logical or conscious sense. Yeah, conscious is a good word.
No, I love that, Lala. And, we're not seeing clearly in the Neptune transit. That's the truth. And that's not negative and or positive, but we believe in this transit, even being a square, I think we want to see the good in everything. So it's almost like it wants to produce positivity, but our path ahead is not clear. So, I might often say to a woman client, or a female client rather, if I have them in my astrology practice, and this is one of the squares they're under and they're single, and they're like, I just really want love. I would probably say to your listeners out there, it's not one of those times to really, it doesn't mean you won't get into a relationship in a Neptune square, but it's unlikely to last, because the dream stays for that period of the transit, whether that is 12 months or a little bit longer. And then we're caught up in that path. We're so invested in, we really know what we want, or we think we do, or feel we do in this case, but often we'll come out of it, and that very thing that we wanted to create under the Neptune square no longer has meaning.
To me, it more
and that
feels
can be
like
across the board.
To me, it more feels like there's just no certainty. Right now, I feel like there's just no certainty whatsoever.
Yeah. And that's that sense of self, the blurred boundary, the rose-coloured glasses. And I will say too, that if people were, say, materialistic or loved, nothing wrong with that. As you've said, you have a love for money. That's wonderful. And that's wonderful that you can say that out loud and own that yourself. And what can happen under a Neptune transit is sometimes for people, the material side of things or having possessions are no longer enough. We're not fulfilled enough for that. So we start to look for those more luminal experiences. Doesn't mean, of course, as a human being, we still have a requirement for obviously income, money, certain possessions, because that drives security and stability in a human's life. But with this Neptune square, it's like not necessarily that for that period of time. Those things are way down on the needs and or value list of the human being.
Yes, I'm feeling that.
Yeah. So, and we just have to keep our, as best as we can with a Neptune transit, we just have to keep our, it's almost like you have to keep an eye open. Kind of like I see with cats when they're sleeping, but they're not really. There's an eye that comes open and they're like, I'm watching you, which is hard when you're under the Neptune square, because sometimes too you can get deceived, and that can weave into whether that's within a relationship where people are saying all the right things that you want to hear, or whether it's in a financial deal, in business. You can be easily, led down the wrong, I guess, watery realms. Your raft goes down the river, but you don't have any paddle.
I think it's more, for me, it's having a sticky note. It's almost like having a constant reminder of yourself, hey, remember you're in this transit, and just be a bit more mindful, ask a few more questions, get curious.
Yep. So it seems like, you've got a little bit of the feet on the ground style, or you've got a bit of direction, but it's important just for people to know that, just keep as much as you can the wits about you, because sometimes, altered reality, when we're not seeing things clearly, we can kind of, and when our boundaries, even personal boundaries in a Neptune square, the walls come down. It's not a Saturn transit, it's open field, man. It's open slather. So, because we kind of want everything to come in to fulfill that creative purpose and those dreams. So I'm hoping that, and I think I said to you and for the listeners, the best way to navigate a Neptune square from my astrologer's lens is, it's not the best time of life to make huge or major life changes. So, let's not move the whole family overseas. Let's not really get married to that person that we've only known for 6 weeks because they propose and they tell you everything that you want to hear. And again, at all costs, just keeping certain substances that, I guess, for better of two terms, that dull or numb, your senses. Because you do find that through that period, you become a bit more sensitive to things, like particularly alcohol. Neptune transits can produce that, just the sensitivity, the piercing of the veil, that type of thing. But you might find too that you dream a lot, or that, literally, like, if that is your thing, sometimes people will be like, I would not have a clue if I dream. Suddenly, I mean, more so if Mercury, the planet Mercury, is involved and you're having a Mercury-Neptune transit somewhere in the stage of it too, perhaps. But I've with the heightened senses, rather, that's that attainment of something that's outside of ourselves too, in terms of, people might start getting some meditative visions, or they suddenly want to meditate as well. I said meditation or a yin yoga class. It's those feminine things that bring you closer to yourself. But yes, I forgot to mention meditation is a great way to navigate this transit too.
Oh, great.
I don't ever say sit down and force yourself to do it. You have to meet yourself to that. And if it's not the right environment, then perhaps other modalities might help as well, that will bring you a little bit closer to that transit and, burn the incense. Maybe, there's so many things on YouTube that you could do in terms of
And there's always
meditation.
walking meditations, which I love.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, in any given moment, we can just walk quietly down the street for 2 minutes, even if it's 2 minutes, and on our own and not say anything. So, so I think that's probably enough, because I could keep talking about Neptune transit. But do you feel that that's enough for you? And
So last but not least, well, I guess only so when do we have our Uranus transit?
So that usually is, again, early 40s. So it can be not long after the, just trying to think of timelines and exactness. It can be around 44. I'm pretty sure it's 44. So again, that early 40s bat. But it's the Uranus opposition. So the way that the planets are talking is in, like, if you're sitting on the seesaw and you picture someone on the other opposite end, that is what we call a Uranus, an opposition communication between planets. That they're literally, as it suggests, they're sitting opposite one another. You're sitting opposite another person at a dinner table. So that can be, this is a really interesting one. So if you haven't already had, so it will come after the Neptune square. And if you haven't already kind of lived some dreams, you know, you've had the Pluto square, you've had that bit of Saturn's reality, a few things in between, then you get to the Uranus opposition. Yeah, okay. So how could we best navigate this? Well, it's almost like Uranus is exciting, and it's the unexpected, and it's almost like things become a little bit chaotic. We put our fingers in the PowerPoint and we want zest for life.
That's when a lot of people start impulsive buying, changing their clothes.
So this is probably like, yeah, sports. Maybe this feeds more into the sports cars, but under a dream Neptune transit we can too. This is when people start to maybe get tattoos. This is the rebellion. So Uranus is the planet rebel.
This is the start of when some people might start experiencing perimenopause. I was talking to somebody today, apparently. So during, actually might be yesterday.
A bit early for some people, but yeah, maybe.
So this could be, you know, when you start not happy, I guess not being happy with your environment, divorce, all that kind of things.
Yeah, you want freedom. So Uranus too is, not only is it a chaotic, unexpected energy, but you want to break free. So I remember when I learnt astrology from my gorgeous teacher, and I think I remember Kelly saying one thing about the Uranus transit, because being an Aquarian sun, again, I don't link Uranus to having rulership to Aquarius, but the modern day astrologers may. But I feel quite, it does have flavors linked to, but it doesn't rule, is what I say, as the way that I work as an astrologer. However, Uranus, again, is generational. So every 7 to 8 years, Uranus will spend that amount of time period within a zodiac sign. And up to 9 years, and over that time you get a whole generation of, you know, for example, currently Uranus in Taurus, which will leave Taurus and go into Gemini next year. So we've just had we're coming to the end literally of a whole bat of Uranus in Taurus. So when they get to their early 40s, you know, 40, 44-ish, to put it in context, they'll have, you know, these, so you're in that period of life, right, Lala? And where I was going with this is that you see maybe perhaps someone had spent a lot of their 30s, early 40s. I don't mean to sound like just talking about women, but say, for example, you've had someone that's just had children, whether it's 2 or 3, they've completely dedicated themselves through that period of time, say from Saturn return at 28, 29, right through, and you come through to this Uranus opposition. They're like, I actually want to do something for myself. Could also be like the dads that stay at home that meet this period too, or they've taken a backward step because they wanted to, or whatever reason, right? But often I see it more coming out in women where they just want to break free. They're like, oh, and that's what Uranus wants. And it can come out of nowhere all of a sudden. So suddenly no one has any body ink and they'll get all these tattoos. Or suddenly there will be an example of a life event, and exactly like there'll be a shake-up. It can create chaos, so however that looks, but the ultimate desire of the Uranus opposition, because in opposition compared to square aspects is we're trying to balance things out. But in that, because if you're sitting opposite something, but in the balancing out, often what we have to do is we have to cut some things out that aren't working, because otherwise how do you get balance? And to do that, we have to make a choice. And sometimes the choice is not always going to be pleasurable for the other person or people involved. So suddenly someone might say, I don't want to stay at home for 2 days. I want to go, I want to go traveling. I want to seek out something. I want to do something for myself. I want to break free. Or, yeah, there can be ranges of extremes. Or they just really want to get completely more individualized in Uranus opposition, and authenticity is the word. I just want to become more authentically me. So I think in my Uranus opposition, which is a couple of years ago, almost 3 now, could be a bit longer. Hang on. Anyway, round about then, I wanted to work for myself as an astrologer. I mean, no joke that, Uranus is kind of the Einstein energy, the kook, paired very well with my Aquarius sun. Uranus and my sun do make contact in my chart, and Aquarius is related to the science, the scientist, the kook. And I had this transit where it was like to my, communicating back to my sun in a way, a trickier way, where also it was like, you need to authentically become more of who you wanted to come here to be, which my Aquarian sun was like, it's in my ninth house of which can be under the guise of, the ninth house in the birth chart can be about astrology. And all I could think about was like, I just want to break free. I'm so sick of working for people. And, maybe after Neptune's square of disappointments, I was like, I can't deal with this anymore. And I just wanted some freedom to work for myself. And I was like, yep. And that's when I birthed Imrama by name under my Uranus opposition. And I broke free at least from a 4-day work week. And I like I said, the opposition is about making choices and cutting things out. And I cut something out that wasn't working so that I could create individualization within myself and come out to who I really was as the astrologer, that no longer should I hide that identity because it was linked to my sun, this transit. If that hopefully gives a little bit of context. So, and no Aquarian sun likes to be stuck and bound anyway. Yes, it's fixed by mode of operation or modality, but no Aquarian likes to be told what to do. Ask any Aquarius. So this transit just kind of went, no, that doesn't work anymore. I'm going. So, excuse me. So what the Uranus opposition is about in the early 40s too is becoming really authentic to yourself, Lala. And again, the reason why it's linked to midlife word crisis is because it can rise up things. It's a tricky aspect. So you're restless in this stage. So I would say too that people can feel a bit more anxious because we have to make some choices. Uranus can stir our nervous system, our adrenal glands. So perhaps keeping stimulants like coffee a little bit low, but then generally, again, like with the Neptune transits, a different iteration, we tend to, because we've got so much electric charge through us, it's like we can't sleep and we can't turn off. But yet we are quite adrenally exhausted as well because we just want that chase, that charge of potentiality of electricity through us. Does this make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, it can be disruptive. There can be chaos. You're probably questioning a lot of things. Is this relationship with XYZ good for me? Is this what I really want to do? XYZ. But it's very important that in Uranus opposition that you express yourself clearly, because that's what Uranus also requires from you, is expression. So it might even weave through from that Neptune square story, the dreams, the creativity, things that you no longer maybe didn't stick in that Neptune square, but in Uranus, you're like, actually, the things that I really want to do now that I've got clarity, I'm going to go off. See you later. And yeah, sometimes that's when you can see like longer term relationships just completely break down, because that obviously there's a lot to that too. There's a structure and a base to that. But often, again, like the Neptune square, Uranus too, we've got to be careful we're not too flippant. We don't just go make that choice based on attaining that freedom and thinking it's going to solve and fix everything. But for that moment in...
That's a very good point. I think that's a very, very good point. And that's why I was going to suggest...
And your career could crumble.
Thanks. That was exactly what I was thinking. How do you know?
Because I know this transit's going to come up for you, but I'm like, we'll get into that when we need to. But for now, we need to just keep you in the Neptune bay in the present moment and your present birth year.
I remember our discussion very well. I needed to come and see you about my next year, about my next lot of transits. I think
I said that.
A good thing is journaling and a lot of self-reflection, right, through any of these transits. And I'm the first one to say, you know, prior to, I really only started journaling probably about 3 years ago, and that changed my life. Anytime I have an uncleared head or clouded head, it just allows me to be with myself and get my thinkings on paper. And it's really about journaling. As some people might think, well, it's a bit, you know, it's like going back to school and doing your assignments. But it actually involves a lot of senses. So it involves your mind, it involves physical writing it involves your eye looking at it. And if you really want to, read it out so you can say it and you can hear it as well. And any activity that involves as many senses as possible essentially does a couple of things. Neurologically, it helps us make sense of things. But from a manifestation perspective, it also helps us manifesting things quicker.
Yeah.
So highly recommend journaling.
That's beautiful. And I think it keeps us accountable and responsible.
Yeah.
Whether we realize it or not, even if you just write one line, like again, like with meditation, Lala, as you were saying with journaling, there's no point in causing stress in oneself already under these midlife transits to doing something you don't want to do, particularly under the Uranus opposition. But I will say, yes, it's probably a good idea to, if journaling isn't your thing, then look at the rash ideas that are suddenly coming up, you know. Maybe it's not feasible to buy the sports car that has no room or seats for children and you've got kids under 10. Maybe that's not the thing to do. However, you still might follow through with it, but that's that freedom, you know, I'll block all that out. Still live that, but also know that outside the transit, you probably won't have the same desire for that type of field, but it will necessarily give you the liberation and the freedom while you're living through it, and you're gonna make it happen. You do anything possible under the Uranus opposition. You pull out all the knives, forks, and spoons from the drawers. The drawers are empty, and you're like, I want excitement. You know, the new beginnings is a big thing under Uranus. It just produces it's life. I want to feel alive.
But also shows us how resourceful we are, right?
Yes, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that this too shall pass.
Exactly.
So often in Uranus oppositions, or even in Neptune, you know, people that are observing us from if they're close to us or their acquaintances at work, they'll be just like, what is Lala doing? Like 1 minute she's doing this type of project. Now she's suddenly changing her mind. And you kind of just want to go, I just want
But
to let
that's
you
just
know, but
me,
my
though.
astrologist, no, but my astrologer said that I'm under a Neptune transit. So we'll just leave it at that.
Well, that's also when it's good to have somebody like Melanie in my life.
That's just where you can make a little bit of fun. Or that's me saying as the astrologer, let's just have a bit of fun with this, you know. So often you'll see people in the outside world that don't understand what's happening, particularly if we were quite a stable person, then all of a sudden we're body inking ourselves or you know, oh, I thought that your relationship was amazing. And it's like no one lives what we're living. That's why, again, it's important to have that team around us when we're going through these sorts of periods.
So on that note, I don't want to cut you short. How can people work with you? How do we, I guess, first of all, what are some of the offerings that you got there so people can actually work with you?
So at the moment, what I'm doing is like a little mentorship program. So it's about a 5-month period, which isn't advertised on my Instagram. So I'm Imrama Astrology is on Instagram. So Imrama, so IMRAMA _ astrology. So that is my socials page, Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, this mentorship hasn't been mentioned, which the astrologer will change. I'll pin it on my wall, but it's a 5-month process that I literally just birthed a couple of months ago, and I'm doing a pilot program with a couple of people, and I'm taking through clients with their birth template or your birth chart is what I'm referring to that. So that is you essentially and all the inner workings, and we meet monthly, and we also encompass a year ahead reading with that as well, and it's all one package. But the idea of me to work with clients this way is a little bit more private. I'm wanting to do things a little bit smaller at the moment, and I'm really wanting to impart all these seeds of wisdom that I now have, my diploma that I attained back in 2008, right through to all the constant webinars that I take, typical ninth house sun, learning. And I want to check back with clients as well. I want to know what's working for them, what isn't, and getting them to really understand and ask questions. So rather than me just having a 60-minute year ahead session, which I still do, but at the moment for returning clients, my main focus is to work on this mentorship program, or if that doesn't suit a client, do my 90-minute insight consultation, which is again that birth chart template. But at the moment, the only way to do a year ahead with me, the 60-minute, is to come on board of the mentorship program. I'm wanting to go small so that I can really focus on people that are really serious about using astrology as a transformation tool to learn more about themselves. And my passion is life direction and particularly career. And I've noticed, perhaps on the back of me doing things differently in my life the last 2 years, I'm attracting in women. My business is predominantly women, but it's also, I do have male clients. I'm very open to that, and children. I do children's charts as well for parents. But my main aim is to really guide people. I'm attracting people that are changing jobs because of the outer world changes as well. They seem to be having one of these midlife transits. So in essence, the mentorship program, you can contact me through my DMs, direct messaging, and on my profile page on Instagram, I have my email address. Feel free for listeners, if you're interested to know more about your astrology and feel that I'm someone you could work with, and please do email me. But my Instagram page acts as a really good booking system via DMs, to be honest, Lala.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll post all those details on the show notes as well, if anyone didn't catch the details.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me on. It was a wonderful chat, and of course I was nervous, but it was just like having a conversation. So I do hope that your listeners and yourself got a great insight into some of this, even if it's just a takeaway of a sentence or two of midlife transits and some of their impacts. So thank you again for the opportunity. I really, really enjoyed doing this. Actually, all my air planets are alive. Can you not tell? I can't stop talking.
I can tell. I can tell just looking through the screen and through your energy as well. Well, on that note, Melanie, thank you so much for your wisdom and for your knowledge and being able to share that with all of us. And for my listeners out there, we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Much love. Bye-bye.